Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to cover how do you process data in a project environment. It is quite important that whether you're a project manager, you're a project member, or even a team leader in a project environment, decision making based on data is very, very important. But for you to make that decision, the first thing that you have to do is to collect that data. You might want to call it data, it's the same thing. So this is what we're going to cover in this video, and I would encourage you to watch this video all the way up to the end, because the information you're going to get from this video is quite important for every project environment. So let's get started. In this video, I'm going to cover how to process, or what is the stage or the stages that you have to follow for you to process data in a project environment. You might want to call it data, it's the same thing. So there are basically four stages we're going to cover in this video. The data gathering process or processes, we're also going to cover that. We are also going to cover data analysis in a project environment. Then the third one, we are also going to cover how do you represent data in a project environment. Then the last one is how do you use the collected data to make decisions. So decision making is also the last part that we're going to cover in this video. So let's get it. So have you ever heard someone saying, what is the variance? What is the cost variance? What is the schedule variance in a project environment? Or have you ever heard someone asking, how are we doing in terms of progress? Have you ever heard someone asking, did you get some expert judgment from someone else? Or you might have heard someone asking, what was the outcome of the brainstorming process that you went through? So these are some of the activities that you perform in a project environment in order to create data, or to analyze it, or even to represent it, and also to make decisions based on that data. So that is what we're going to cover in this particular video. So let's move on. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Oscar Mbira. I'm a certified project and program manager. In this video, I'm going to cover data processing in a project environment, which is one of the most important activities that you can ever expect in a project environment. So let's move on. I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe button, and the notification button, so that you're the first person to be notified each time a new video is uploaded on this channel. It will also help this channel to grow. It will also help this channel to produce more videos like this one. In a project environment, when you're starting a project and you're executing a project, you're monitoring a project all the way up to closure, there is normally a lot of data that is coming in. I can give you a good example. It's like when you're running any business, you always collect some data to do with your business. The same also applies to project management. So in project management, as you initiate your project, execute a project, and then close your project, you collect a lot of information all the way along the journey. And one mistake I've seen so many project managers making is not to take advantage of that information. They collect, they make decisions, they move on, that's it. I can tell you, managing data, you might want to call it data, it's the same thing. Managing data in a project environment is very, very critical. It's very, very important, and you should consider that whether you're a project manager or you're even just a project member or even a project team manager. The information that you collect is very important for your decisions. So there are basically four stages that you take through the data that you have in a project environment. So the first one is data gathering. We are going to cover a number of items or ways to gather data. For example, we talk of brainstorming as an example of data gathering. We are also talking of, say, interviews. You can also interview people for you to gather information. You can also send questionnaires. And you can also do some surveys just to make sure that at least you're able to gather information. So data gathering, we are going to cover on that particular aspect. Then the second item, is data analysis. So, after gathering the data, you also need to analyze it. You need to get more information, or you want to transform it from data, which is raw data, to information. That is also very, very important. You normally make decisions based on information. Say, for example, you want to analyze for the last week, how is the team performing in terms of, say, defect resolution, assuming it's a software company or it's a software project. How is the team performing in terms of attending to requirements from the user, resolving issues coming from the user. So that is what is called trend analysis. You also want to look at variations, say for example, cost variation from last month to this month. So this is all part of data analysis. Then the third one is data representation. How do you show the information that you've been collecting over time, whether it's a week, it's a month, or it's a year, pertaining to that project? How do you represent it? Especially when it comes to stakeholders or people who are not involved in the day-to-day running of the project. How do you represent that information? So we are going to look at histograms, for example, which shows the distribution of the information. We are also going to to look at a number of them so that we appreciate what exactly does it mean when you say want to represent data that is coming from the project. Then the last one, which is very, very critical, is all these stages. You are gathering data, you are analyzing it, you are also representing it. You now need to make a decision. Should we increase the budget? Should we increase the resources? Should we reduce the resources? Are we supposed to adjust our schedule? And so on and so forth. So that is why it's very important that, especially if you're a project manager, you make what are called data-driven decisions in a project environment. That is very, very important. And this is what we are going to cover in this particular video. It's going to be quite interesting, and I would encourage you to watch this video all the way up to the end. So let's move on one by one. We are going to look at these 4 stages: data analysis, data gathering, data representation, and then decision making. If you want to dive deeper into understanding what is project management, I've also created for you a very comprehensive ebook, which you can also access using the link in the description below. So you could be asking, Oscar, why does data matter in a project environment? I'm going to explain to you. Data management in a project environment is very, very important. And one of them that you have to appreciate is decision making. Don't make decisions based on opinions or based on bias. Always try to make sure that your decisions, they are based on the data that you are collecting when either before starting the project, during the project, and even when you're closing the project. You cannot make a decision based on personal opinions in a project. Always try to understand, especially from all the stakeholders from the project team, what information is available for you to make that decision. So it matters because you need to make a decision. Number 2, why it matters to have data management or understanding in a project environment is also on risk management. You also need to manage risk in a project. But how do you manage risk if you don't understand what is going on? If you don't collect the information that is required for you to understand probably the impact of the risk, the probability of the risk, and also the proximity of the risk. So it's quite important that you appreciate and understand that you use that data for decision making, you use that data for risk management. If you want to understand more about risk management, I've created a video on risk management. You can also watch it on my channel. I'll also leave a link in the description below. Then the next one is you want your stakeholders to trust you. Stakeholders, they don't normally trust you based on your opinions. They also want you to back up your opinions with some data. Next, with some information, some numbers, okay? So it's quite important that you also collect this information in a project environment. I've seen some scenarios where the information is scattered all over. You find someone has got an Excel sheet sitting somewhere, someone has got a Word document sitting somewhere, someone has got a plan of activities sitting somewhere. So this is where we encourage you to have the project management information system, PMIS. If you want to explore some of these tools that are existing, I'm going to leave a link in the description below. You can also check some of these tools where the information is actually centralized and it becomes very easy for you to manage information in a project environment. Then you also need to use the data for continuous improvement. Some they want to call it lessons learned. You cannot learn something until and unless you understand what was it, what caused it, how can you improve it, what are you learning, and how can you apply it into other projects or into the organization as a whole. So data management in environment is also very important because you also use it for continuous learning. You also use it for lessons learned. You're asking, what do you mean by continuous improvement? So when you are running a project, there are certain repetitive phases that you might face in a project environment. You do it and then you do it again. You do it and then you do it again. Say, for example, you are doing construction project. You want to build a 20-story building. So after finishing the first floor, you repeat the same thing for the second floor. You repeat the same thing for the third floor. But there are certain lessons that you are picking from that process. So this is where I'm saying, those lessons that you are picking, you need a way to manage them. You need a way to gather them and then improve the next stage and so on and so forth. In a project environment, when you have all the data, it's easier for you to control the scope. It's easier for you to control the costs. It's easier for you to also control the schedule. So data management in a project environment is very important because you also control the scope, you also control the schedule as well as the budget. You cannot control the budget without gathering information on how much has been spent for the previous phases, how much you intend to spend for the next phases. So data gathering is very important, and this is where it becomes very important for you to make decisions. With these 4 stages in a project environment, the first stage you're going to go through, now we're going deeper into these stages, is data gathering. So let us go through in terms of data gathering. We want to appreciate what do we know. This is the essence of data gathering. What do we know about the project environment? For example, you might know that a certain supplier is getting out of business. You gather that information. You might learn that from the previous project, you needed maybe say 40 human resources for this type of project. So let's go through data gathering processes one by one. So what exactly is data gathering? Data gathering is a way of collecting information about a particular project process and then use that information to execute the project. So that's a simple definition of it. You're collecting information in a project environment, and then you use that information for additional decision making, analysis, or even representation. So there are so many ways to gather information or data in a project environment. And I can tell you, never stop gathering data in a project environment. When you're initiating a project, make sure you're also gathering data. When you're planning your project, you're also gathering data. When you're doing execution of project, and I can tell you, execution is the longest stage in a project environment, and this is where a lot of data is actually created. So make sure you're also collecting that. Then you also have monitoring and control. Also make sure you're also collecting data, because this is where you're going to make some comparison or variance analysis or even trend analysis. Even when you're closing, also collect some data. This is where you also make sure that your lessons learned register is also updated. So these processes, at any given time, it might not mean that these techniques we are talking about on data gathering, it's applicable everywhere. You need to tailor it according to the project. So the first one is brainstorming. I can tell you from my experience, brainstorming is one of the most important data gathering technique in a project environment. So what do we mean by brainstorming? Brainstorming is a process of bringing together different or divergent views on a particular issue to try to come up with a solution, to try to come up with a way forward. So brainstorming, you look at the different skills, different work streams in a project environment that are actually pertaining to that. You don't bring everyone into a brainstorming session. What I normally do in my projects, because I normally create work stream team leads, I bring them, and then some additional maybe members we know they are going to contribute. Then you present the issue, then allow them to brainstorm as to, is it the best, what can be done, what is available, what is not available, what are the constraints, what are the assumptions, and so on and so forth. So brainstorming is one of the important technique that you can use for data gathering. So let us look at exactly what is brainstorming, what are the advantages and disadvantages of brainstorming. So brainstorming, in a nutshell, it helps to set clear topic and problem statements. So in brainstorming, you bring in certain group of people the people who are going to contribute. You don't need to bring everyone else. Then you have to make sure that the topic that you're talking about, everyone is aware. And make the environment very level. Don't allow those domineering characters to be speaking. There are others who might be quiet but with good ideas. So allow everyone to contribute in that brainstorming process. And also make sure you're inviting the right stakeholders into the brainstorming session. Don't just bring anyone that comes to that. And as a PM, you should be facilitating this. This is very, very important. A PM, one of the roles of a PM is facilitation. If you want to appreciate and understand the roles of PM, I've created a video on the other roles of PM that you have to play in a project from time to time, switching from one role to the other. And one of them is facilitation. I'll also leave a link in the description below. You can also watch it from my channel. Then during brainstorming stage, always make sure that you are capturing all the ideas. Don't listen to one person. Capture all the ideas, whether you're using a whiteboard, you're using a shared screen or whatever. But the best is to use a whiteboard. Use a whiteboard, put down all the ideas, and then probably later on try to group these ideas using what is called affinity diagrams. You can also group them, or even mind mapping. You can also group the ideas so that it helps you to analyze them, okay? Then, after grouping the ideas, you have to choose or prioritize what ideas are supposed to be used and which ones are not supposed to be dropped. This also helps you to gather a lot of information, especially, I normally use it during the planning stage. You want to get as much information as possible. I also use it also in initiating a project, especially when I want to create or update the stakeholder register, or when I'm going through the stakeholder identification process. You bring a lot of people into one room. They can also help you to say, this particular item, yes, this one is it's actually a stakeholder, this one is not. Someone will say it is because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you gather a lot of information on that. So it's quite important that you also use brainstorming as a technique in gathering information in a project environment. So information gathering is very important. And like I said, you also need to gather information from the beginning of the project all the way up to the end of the project. And the second technique we're going to look into in terms of information or data gathering is interviews. So interviews, this is where in most cases you have face-to-face discussions with any of the interested stakeholder. Remember, a stakeholder is anyone who is affected positively or negatively, or who is also affecting the project, or who is perceived to be affected by the project. If you want to understand more about stakeholder management, I've created a full video on stakeholder management. You can also watch it on my channel. I'll also leave a link in the description below. So interviews are very important as a technique for gathering information. You create the questions that you want to ask the people you're going to interview. You sit with them, you ask your questions, you note down whatever their response. In this day and age, you can even record if you have agreed with the person to record. Then you gather information about the project. How do people see the success of this project? How do they understand what is the failure of this project? What is the success of this project? What resources are required, and so on and so forth. From their experience, how long did it take to complete a specific task, for example? If you want to monitor the project, what information are we supposed to gather? So interviewing is very, very important. And where it's applicable, try to make it face-to-face. Where it's not applicable, then you can make it virtual. But the good thing about interviews is it's different from an email, where you just send an email, you wait for someone to respond. But for interviews, you talk to someone, then after talking to someone, you get quick feedback. That is why I was saying face-to-face is better than just sending some document and then you expect someone to respond. So interview must be structured, or it can be unstructured. So what do you mean by this? Structured, it means you have predefined questions that you want to ask the interview person. And these predefined questions, especially when you're working with the seniors, it's easier to give them well in advance before your discussion. They don't want to be surprised by some of the questions coming in. Then you can also have unstructured interview. This is where you just talk, generic talk with people. You can even go for a small discussion over lunch or dinner. Then you start asking what you want to understand more about that project. It's also part of interview, and it's also something that is workable. I've used it in my project, and I believe you can also use it in a project. So just make sure that you have unstructured or you have structured interviews that you are taking through. It will also help. It's one of the very important techniques that you can use during data gathering in a project environment. So the other technique that you can use to collect data in a project environment is the focus group. So what do you mean by focus group? Focus group is it's a group of experts in a certain area. Say, for example, it's a software development project. You have experts in coding, for example. You have also experts in solution design. So if you want to gather more information about solution design, you put together a focus group of experts in solution design. And then you brainstorm, or you even understand, you ask questions, you discuss, you come up with a solution for a specific area. So focus group is very, very important. And focus group is not just taking everyone. You're just looking at experts, people who have experience in that area, or even people who are even teaching or they are lecturing in that area. So depending on the type of project, you also need that focus group so that you gather as much information as possible. They have a lot of experience, so you can even understand historically what was done when a certain problem was faced. You can even understand historically what was causing a certain problem to happen and how long did it take to apply such a solution. So focus group has got also its own characteristics, and one of them we are going to look at is typically it must be 6 to 12 participants, and it must be facilitated by a trained moderator, someone who is able to moderate when things get hot or when there are arguments. And then it also has to be interactive. You talk to people. If it's possible, make it physical. If it's not possible, make it virtual. But just make sure that it's also interactive. It's very important that you also make use of focus group in terms of data gathering. You get a lot of information from these experienced people. And that is quite important that you include it as part of data gathering in a project environment. And then the last one on data gathering that we're going to look at is what is called a checklist. A checklist is a list of items that you have to tick against or to confirm against as you gather information in a project environment. So a checklist is also one of the techniques that you can use. You can say for example, do we have the mobile-friendly interface? Is it available? Or what's going to happen when it's offline? Do you need it? For example, are you integrating with anything else? Are you going to use emails? Are you going to wait for feedback? Is it synchronous or asynchronous? All those things. So it's quite important that you can also use a checklist as a data gathering technique. You also have a questionnaire. So questionnaire, you have a document, or if it's electronic, you have a list of items where you ask the users to put or to select information. It could be closed-ended, which means it's a yes or no. It could be multiple choice, which means they're choosing one or two answers. Or it could be a Likert scale, where you rate 1 to 5 or not. Or it could be open-ended. So questionnaire is also one of the items you can use, one of the techniques you can also use for data gathering in a project environment. That is very, very critical. Let's look at which method to use when it comes to data gathering, as you can see on the screen. So if you are brainstorming, it is best for idea generation, risk identification, and also problem solving. And then the group size must be between 5 and 15. And the speed is very medium as well as depth. When it comes to interviews, you have deep individual insights and also sensitive topics. It's best for that. And also group size must be 1-to-1. Speed is slow, but the depth is also very, very high. When it comes to focus groups, you also have consensus building and also expert input. You have experts to give you feedback, and the group size should be around 6 to 12, and then medium in terms of speed, and also the depth is very, very high. When it comes to checklist, it's a standardized requirements that is best for standardized requirements, and nothing is actually missed because you have a standardized requirement. You tick what is in, what is out in terms of the checklist, and then the group size can be any. And also it could be You can also use fast for speed, and also it's slow on depth. So checklist can be physical or even electronic. So that is why you have any size. Then when it comes to surveys, it's best for large audience and also comparable quantitative data. Which means if you have got a large audience, survey is easier. In this day and age, you use technology. You can either have a website or an application where people can give feedback in terms of the surveys. And this is also unlimited in terms of group, and the speed is also very fast, as well as the depth is also medium, low to medium. I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe button, and the notification button, so that you're the first person to be notified each time a new video is uploaded on this channel. It will also help this channel to grow. It will also help this channel to produce more videos like this one. So in this section of the video, we're going to cover data analysis in a project environment. So remember, the first stage is to gather the information, which is trying to answer the question, what do we have, or what do we know? Now, in data analysis, we are now looking at what does it mean, okay? You're analyzing the data. You received it, you have gathered it through brainstorming. You've also gathered through interviews, for example, surveys, focus groups, checklists, and so on and so forth. So what does it mean? So this is what we are going to cover in this particular video. And I would encourage you to watch it all the way up to the end. So analyzing collected data in a project environment is very, very important. Why is it important? You want to understand what it means, whatever you've gathered. Say, for example, you have gathered that you have used 70% of your plant resources. So what does it mean? Does it mean you have to increase it? Does it mean you underestimated? Is there some lesson that you have to learn from that process? So we're going to go through analysis. We are going to examine the data that has been given or collected. We are going to transform that data, and we are also going to model to discover more information or insights from the data. So that's the purpose of data analysis in a project environment. So we're basically going to look at 4 ways. The first one is alternative analysis, the root cause analysis. We are also going to look at variance analysis. We are also going to look at trend analysis. So let us go through them one by one to understand what is this data analysis that we're doing. What does it mean? How do we analyze data in a project environment? So when it comes to alternative analysis of data in a project environment, is you're trying to look at different options that are available, and also you want to do some evaluation based on some criteria that you have for those options before you make a final decision. So I can give you a good example of the options that you can look at. For example, you can look at the cost. If I take option A, how much is it going to cost me? If I take option B, how much is it going to cost me? If I'm going to take option C, how much is it going to cost me? You can also look at, say, for example, time to deploy. Say, for example, it's a software solution. If I was going to deploy it using this option, is it going to take me 2 months, 2 weeks, 1 hour, or whatever? If I was going to deploy using option C, option D, for example, how long is it going to take me? You can also look at customization. If I want to make this specific to this customer, specific to this stakeholder, if I take option A, how much or how long is it going to take? You can also look at maintenance, for example. Also, even the risk level. If I take option A, what is the risk level involved? If I take option B, what is the risk level involved? If I take option C, what is the risk level involved? So then at the end of the day, using those the criteria that you were using for evaluation, you are now able to make a decision, or you are now able to make a recommendation as to what is your final recommendation, to which option should be taken, and probably you might want to document additional information as to why you decided to go for that option. So alternative analysis is very, very important when it comes to data analysis in a project. Don't make the mistake I've seen with some other projects, project managers. They just make a decision straight away. There's no looking at option A, option B, option C, assuming it's available. They don't even look at it. They'll just tell you, we're going to take option B. So it's quite important that you look at all the parameters, the criteria you're going to use for evaluation, and then you make a decision in terms of which option are you going to take. In a project environment, you normally face challenges. There could be challenges, there could be issues, there could be problems. Throughout my experience with project management, I have not gone through any project where you don't face challenges, you don't face problems or issues. So the main important item when it comes to data analysis in a project environment is to understand what exactly is causing the issue, so that you don't focus or you don't fix symptoms, you fix the root cause of the issue. So there's a technique called root cause analysis in a project environment. So root cause analysis, you are trying to understand what exactly is causing the challenge, what exactly is causing the problem, what exactly is causing this issue to come about. So once you understand that, there could be a lot of outcomes from that. Probably you might learn a specific lesson, which you can also apply to the next phases of the project or to the next project in an organization. Or it's a lesson that you can also even share with the organization as a whole to be applied organization-wide. So you want to pick up the lessons, number one. Number two, you also want to prevent that issue or that challenge to come again in the project, current project, or even future projects. So there are so many items which you can use for root cause analysis. And one of them is what is called Ishikawa diagram, or in general, RCA, root cause analysis diagram, where you look at possible categories that can cause the problem. And then to the right, you have your issues. Let me show you. So let me give you a good example on how to apply this root cause analysis in a project environment. I'm going to give you an example where a construction project was delayed. So some of the questions that you have to ask to analyze the root cause is, for example, why was the project delayed? As an example, you might get answers like because of the foundation was poor or it was late. Okay, you can even ask the question, why was the foundation poor? You know, after every question, you ask the next one, you ask the next one, until you get to the bottom cause of the issue. Then you are told that it was because the concrete supplier delivered 3 days late. Then you ask an additional question again, why did the supplier deliver late? You are being told because the order was placed with insufficient lead time. You can also ask another question, why was the order placed late? Then you are told because the procurement approval took longer than planned. Then the other one is, why did approval take long? Because the approval workflow was unclear. So the root cause becomes very clear to you. It was the approval process that caused all this construction project to be delayed. So you don't focus on symptoms, you actually focus on the root cause of the problem. So we normally use an Ishikawa diagram to represent the root cause analysis. So when you're executing a project from initiation all the way up to closure, as you face challenges or as some of these risks becomes or they materialize, becomes an issue, you will always have some variances, which means you have planned something during your planning stage, and then during your execution you face some challenges. Say something was supposed to take 10 days, it's now taking 15 days, which means obviously there's a variance from what was planned for 10 days from actually what is the reality, which is 15 days. The same also applies to schedule. A schedule can change. The same applies to cost. The cost can change. The same also even applies to scope. So there's also another technique for data analysis called variance analysis, which means you want to see the difference between what was planned and what exactly is happening within the project. It's normally done during the monitoring and control phase or stage of a project, which is normally done from the beginning all the way up to the end. You want to compare what you initially had planned against what actually is happening. And we normally use the end value management. I know you might be asking, Oscar, what is end value management? I'm going to create an additional video on end value management. You can also watch it on my channel. But basically, what we are talking about here is what was planned in the project and what exactly has been executed in the project. So there is a way to calculate these variations or variance. When it comes to, there's a way to calculate this variation. I'm going to start with schedule variation. If you want to find what is the schedule variance, you subtract the planned value from the end value. And if you want to see how are you doing in terms of schedule, are you behind schedule, ahead of schedule, 10% or so, you also look at the what is called schedule performance index, which is also the end value divided by the planned value. Then the other variance that you have is also to do with cost, where you have the end value minus your actual cost. And then if you want to see the cost performance index, you also have your end value divided by the actual cost. So variance analysis is also very important when it comes to project management analysis. Then the next technique when it comes to analysis in a project environment or data analysis in a project environment is to look at trend analysis. So trend, you are looking at the performance or the information gathered over time in a project to get more insights. Are you going up in terms of budget? Are you going down? Are you not moving? And what does it mean? What decision should you make? So there are quite a number of answers that you might need when it comes to trend analysis. Say, for example, you want, is our defect rate increasing or decreasing? This is part of trend analysis. It might be decreasing or increasing. So what does it mean? Does it mean the rate of resolution is good or is it very slow? Or even is the project cost performance index, is it worse than last week? Remember, the trend analysis, you're comparing over a specific period. Last week, which means you're comparing on a daily basis, or last month, or even last year. And then you also, our stakeholders' satisfaction scores trending. Is it going up? Is it good? And so on and so forth. Or our sprints velocity improving? This is now talking about agile methodology. Are we, the velocity is what the team can do at any particular time in an agile environment. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? What does it mean? And then also, do we have the budget burn rate or overrun in terms of budget? So trend analysis is also another very important technique that you can use in a project. I always use it in my project environment. Just try to understand what exactly can be corrected or what exactly can be prevented in future when you're analyzing this trend. So it's quite important that in a project environment, you do this trend analysis all the way up to the end. So after analyzing the data, you want to answer the question as to how do we show this to either stakeholders or any interested party in the project. So there are so many ways to present data in a project environment. One of them is flowcharts. For example, we're going to cover them one by one. Fishbone, which is the Ishikawa that we're talking about, the matrix. You also want to use that, histograms, scatter diagrams, and also control charts. So you want to present what you have gathered. You want to present your analysis, which means what it means. You also want to present the information that we have currently in a project. How do you do that? Let's look into them one by one. So the first one is flowchart. So in a flowchart diagram, you want to show how processes or sequenced processes, they go all the way from the beginning up to the end. It might have if-then, which means it can have branches or different scenarios which you can model. But at the end of the day, it should be able to show one route that is going to be taken all the way up to the end. And in between, what processes are supposed to be done and what techniques you can use. So a flowchart is normally represented with some symbols. One of them is if it's a start, it's normally where you're starting from. And then process, this is where the process or the action items are being done, or the techniques or the tools that you are using. Then you also have some decision points, which means if I take 6, what does it mean? If I take 10, what does it mean? If I don't do anything, what does it mean? So you also have another part for decision making. It also has a symbol of a rectangle. Then you also have the flow, which shows which direction are you also following. Then the start and the end, they normally use the same symbol, which is spherical, and they are all differentiated by the colors. So start might have green, and then stop or end might have blue or even red. So a flowchart is one of the presentation of information or data in a project environment. You have gathered, now you want to show people how the information, say for example, you are gathering information on, I'll give you an example of a banking situation. You want to give information, or you want to show how information flows when it comes to deposits, cash deposits. So obviously, there's going to be either electronic or physical completion of a deposit slip, where you indicate how much money you want to use. And then there's going to be a signature to approve that you're making that deposit. Then there's going to be capturing of the account number, the amount, and even some denominations that you're also going to deposit. So that can also be represented in a flowchart. So a flowchart is one of the very important techniques that you can use to represent data in a project environment. So in this section of the video, we're covering the fishbone, which is also another technique for data representation. So this looks at different causes of a problem. It's normally used for root cause analysis. You have done your root cause analysis. Now you want to present that. You want to present what exactly is causing this, or what are the potential causes of that particular problem. You use a fishbone or Ishikawa diagram. And it moves from left to right, depending on the kind of the problem. One important point to note about fishbone representation is it uses also categories. You don't want to represent 500 issues in one diagram. People may not be able to read it or even understand it. So what do? You also need to make sure that you categorize them. Then you put all the potential causes into those different categories which you can represent. Let us look at an example of what do we mean by fishbone. Say, for example, you have a project deliverable missing quality standards, which means your stakeholders are complaining that whatever is coming out of the project, it's not meeting their standards. So you look at different causes. One of them, it could be people. People could be causing that because of lack of training or because of high turnover. It could be even processes. Your processes are not intact to make sure that the standards are maintained. So we are looking at quality checklists, for example. We are looking at late reviews. It also could be because of materials. The type of material that you are using is also causing the standards to be low, okay? You have the wrong specs, or you're using the poor quality materials, or you're not using even templates. So therefore you end up producing something which your stakeholders might complain. It could be equipment. The type of equipment that you're using, maybe something is obsolete or something substandard, is also causing that. It could be environment. The environment in which you're creating the products or the deliverable of the project could also be causing that. So it could also be because of management. The way people are, there's an unclear scope, for example, there's no oversight. Then at the end of the day, you find the poor quality of deliverables coming out of the project. So this fishbone or Ishikawa diagram is very important when it comes to root cause analysis, when it comes to root cause also representation to stakeholders or any interested party. So the other representation of data in a project environment is what is called histograms or matrices. So when it comes to histogram, you want to show the distribution of issues. Histograms, sometimes they're also called Pareto diagrams. You want to show the distribution of issues to see where, not just issues, you want to show the distribution of the parameter that you are looking at. It could be issues or risk. Where do we have the highest concentration? So that you can focus, if it was a project situation like what I normally do, when you have got a certain area where there's too much high concentration, say for example, you have 3 work streams. One of them is where you're having so many of these issues, which means your focus on that area becomes higher. Even if it means you put more resources, you put additional budget, and so on and so forth. So it's quite important that you understand histogram. It gives you the distribution and then also the concentration, which areas they have too much of this. Remember the rule of 2080. You might have only 20% of the issues, okay, which are causing 80% of the problems. So always make sure that you look at these histograms and understand them. Then when it comes to matrix is quite straightforward. You are representing your data in rows and columns in most cases. For example, what we have on the screen right now, when it comes to prioritization, you can have, as an example, login feature. You might say it can be high value, but low effort, and you don't need to do it now, or you do it now. You can look at even the export, CSV, whether Word or XML, in terms of, so you put your features on the left side, as an example, and then you put your evaluations on the right side in terms of columns. Then you put the parameters. For example, you can put even archiving, of data archiving. Is it low priority? Do you need to do it now? You can do it later, and so you are representing the data that you have collected earlier. In this section of the video, we are covering decision making in a project environment. Decision making in a project environment should be data driven. So this is one of the last can I say, activity or stage in data processing in a project environment. You start with your data gathering using brainstorming, interviews, and so forth. Then you go to your analysis using variance analysis, trend analysis, and so on and so forth. Then you also have a representation where you have, say, for example, histograms. You also have the matrix that you can also, the fishbone representation that you can also. Now, when it comes to decision making, you want to answer the question, what do we do now? Which means you have understood everything. So what are you going to do? Say, for example, you have understood that your budget is going up in terms of spending, and you might not make it up to the end of the project. So what do? Do you stop the project? Do you want to increase the budget? Do you want to change your vendor, your partner? Do you want to change your location? What exactly do you want to do? So this, in decision making, normally has got three kinds of decision making that you can do. One of them is voting. So when it comes to voting, you want people to present themselves as to which decision do they like as compared to the other. Then you also have multi-criteria decision making, which we are going to go through them one by one, multi-criteria. And then the last one is what is called autocratic decision making in a project environment. So you want to answer the question, what do we do now? So let us go through these three types of decision making in a project environment to understand them. So the first one we're going to start with is voting. So normally in a voting environment, you put together a group of people to determine what should be done. Should you reject something? Should you change something? Should you accept something or not? And then based on this voting, you can also make a decision. In most cases, it allows you to have some transparent way of looking at things, okay? So there are three types of voting that you normally go through. The first one is what is called majority wins, which means if more than 50% of the people they vote, then you take that decision in a project environment. I can tell you there are certain projects where you have to go for voting. I know some of you might be saying, we don't need to vote, the project manager will make a decision. No, there are certain cases where you have to vote. Do we really accept this change? Do we have to do this activity? Do we have to provide this to the stakeholders? Or do we have the right stakeholders in the project environment? So in some cases, you might need to make that voting decision, not on a one-to-one, like a PM or just a project team leader, no. Then you have another one called unanimity in terms of voting, which means everyone is agreeing. If everyone doesn't agree, what is called vetoing, if someone doesn't agree, then you don't take that decision. But if everyone agrees, you take that decision. We also have cases like that where we have those decisions. For example, you have a high risk or no go decision for a product. You must agree, everyone. I was involved in software projects. When it comes to go or no go live decision, everyone has to agree. If someone doesn't agree, then you might not even go live with that project. So there's also this category of unanimity where everyone agrees for you to make a decision. Then we have the last one called plurality. Okay, on plurality, what it means is the option with the most votes is going to win. Whether it's 10 people or 12 people or 15, you are the ones who are going to win. And what does it mean? Say, for example, you choose a certain vendor. 4, they've said no to this vendor. 3 have said yes. 2 have said no. So 4 is going to win. So plurality is actually very, very important for voting in a project environment. So the next technique that you can use for decision making in a project environment is what is called multi-criteria decision making, which means you normally create a matrix. Remember what we discussed earlier on matrix, where you have your criteria is one column with criteria. Then your rows, they also represent what you are putting in as the weight. Then at the end of the day, like what you are seeing on the screen, at the end of the day, you make a decision based on that. Say, for example, you want to select a certain project management tool, okay? So one of the items you look at is cost, okay? So for each cost, you look at each and every tool. How much does it cost every tool? For example, you're looking at Jira, you're looking at Asana, You're looking at Monday, for example. You're also looking at Microsoft project. You're even looking at Project Nidus is one of the examples. So you're looking at cost, multi-criteria decision. For each and every tool, you look at cost. That's the first criteria. Second criteria, you might look at ease of use. Okay. Then you are putting the weights of those items. And then you can also look at even features, because this is a software tool, project management tool we are looking at as an example. You are looking at features. You also put a weight for each and every tool that you have. The other criteria is also integration. How easy is it to integrate with other systems? So you also put some weight on that. Then using the calculated weight, you choose the one which has got the highest weight. And that's the one that you go with. The good thing about some of these techniques when it comes to decision making is they remove bias. If someone is biased towards something, then it will not make sense in that particular scenario, because you're using logic, you're using a number of, in some cases you're actually using expert judgment to say this one 2%, this one 3%, this one 5%, this one 6%. Then you get the weighting for each, then you make a decision. So multi-criteria decision making in a project environment is very important, and in most cases, when applied very well, it gives you very good results. In some situations in a project environment, you'll find that what is called autocratic decision making also works very well, especially when it comes to expert projects. One person can make a decision, whether it's a project manager, it's a technical lead, or it's a business lead, or even sponsor. But in an autocratic decision-making environment, only one person makes a decision. It has got its own advantages and disadvantages. But in most cases, autocratic environments or decisions, they gather inputs from members or from stakeholders before they make a decision. So there are certain cases where it works very well. There are also certain cases where it doesn't work very well when it comes to autocratic decision-making. So let us quickly look at some of the examples where it's best autocratic decision making, where one person makes a decision after so many inputs from the project members. Say, for example, there's a crisis or emergency and there's no time for consensus. You cannot wait for people to gather and then make a decision collectively. In that case, one person will just make a decision. It might not be a good example of a project, but if I give you a political environment, the president can make a decision quickly. They don't have to gather the cabinet, as an example. Also in a project environment, a project manager can make a decision without even gathering the team members, if that is necessary. Okay, crisis, for example. For example, there are low stakes in terms of decision making or in terms of routine decisions. Then someone can just make a decision, something routine. Do we have to approve this change, yes or no? Someone can say approve it or reject. Okay. Then, like I said earlier, if the decision maker has got unique skills, okay, or expertise, they can also make a decision. Say, for example, there's a technical lead in a software development environment. They can make a decision as to how the solution is supposed to be designed. They can also make a decision in terms of the tools to be used in the project environment. So that is also very, very important. And in some cases, when there is a deadlock in a project team environment, or even the cost of delay is too much, one person can make a decision. In most cases, a sponsor, if the cost of delay is too much, a sponsor can make a decision, don't do it, or proceed to do it, and then we can fund it later. There are also cases where the scope is clearly defined. If the scope is clearly defined, then there's no need to gather a number of people to make a decision. One person can make a decision, and then you can also move on. And then, depending on the organizational setup or structure, there are cases where the sponsor can actually make a decision in a project. They're using authority. It might not be even a sponsor. It could be even change board. They have authority. And maybe the chair of that body or even the project board can make a decision. So there are also cases where also authority is there and people can make a decision. So decision making can also be done by one person in such a scenario. Then, there are also risks associated with the autocratic decision making, in case you want to go for that. For myself, I try by all means to avoid applying autocratic decision making. But there are also some risks and cautions that you have to take into consideration. If you overuse that, people become very disengaged. Either stakeholders become disengaged, or team members become disengaged. And they might not even support some of these decisions, and it might lead to the failure of that decision or even the project in totality. So you must use it with care. And if you get incomplete information as an individual, you might make the incorrect or poor decision because of the wrong information that we have. So when it comes to autocratic decision making, you have to be very, very, very careful before you take any action. And in some cases, if you just use it arbitrarily, it might damage trust. People might not trust you in your decision, especially if previously you've made some decision which was poor and which led to some negative consequences. People will lose trust in that process altogether. So you need to be very, very careful when it comes to autocratic decision. It's not something that you can always apply. Remember, if you're a project manager, you should always be facilitating, and you should allow the people or the team members to decide or to take the route that you think is the best for the project. So let us look at which decision to use and by when, as you can see it on the screen. So when it comes to majority voting, the speed is very medium, but it's best for team decisions and also selecting tools and approaches. The risk is also medium. And then we have an example situation where 8% team votes on a sprint length, as an example. Then the decision on unanimity, speed also is very slow, and is also best for high stakes and go or no go critical decisions. The risk is also very low, and also all sponsor agrees to project cancellation. Okay, all sponsors, as an example. Then plurality, we have medium speed. We have best for selecting from 3 or so options without consensus. You can use the plurality. And then risk also is medium. And then example is a situation. Example situation is when vendor selection with 4 candidates. Then when it comes to multi-criteria decision-making, MCDA, the speed is slow, but it's best for complex trade-offs needing objectivity. And also the risk is very low. Then you have your as an example, you want to choose ERP systems across 6 criteria. So you can also use it. We have looked at one example before. When it comes to autocratic, the speed is very fast, because remember it's one person who is making that decision. And then it's also good for crisis. It's also good for emergence or even clearly owned decisions. And then the risk is also very high, because they might use incorrect or poor information or even bias. And also you might have disengaged stakeholders and project members. Then PM makes agent technical call during the incident, as an example. So this is quite important. So in this particular section, we are going to go through the summary of all the methods at a bigger glance. The data gathering, the data analysis, data representation, and also decision making. So let's move on. So we looked at data gathering and the methods that you can use: brainstorming, interviews, focus groups, checklists, and also surveys. And data gathering methods, they're also best for certain circumstances. For example, brainstorming is good for generating ideas and risks, and also interviews for deep individual insight. Focus group, it's mainly on the expert consensus. And then checklists, nothing is missed. You have put down the good and the bad. And then the surveys, you have a large scale data that you're going to collect. We also looked at examples. For example, risk ID for IT migration is good for brainstorming. How long is it? The risk, what data type are we using? Is it numeric or is it non-numeric? Hospital HR requirements. Then also focus group on bank application requirements. What are we focusing? Are we focusing on trade finance? Are we focusing on retail? Focusing also on finance or even on lending. Then the checklists, if you want the nice to have, you can also use it as an example. Then customer needs surveys also. Then data analysis, we looked at different methods. Alternative analysis, we looked at root cause analysis, variance, trend analysis, where we look at alternative analysis being good for evaluation of options, and root cause analysis being good to find the real problem. And then variance analysis for measure of performance gap, and then trend analysis to detect patterns over time. And the examples that we have is to build or buy or hire, as an example. Root cause, 5 whys for schedule. Why did it happen? And then what else happened? Variance analysis. We looked at cost variance analysis, schedule variance analysis. Trend analysis also, we looked at rising defect trend, as an example. Or even why so many issues are being retained once they are resolved. Data representation, we looked at flowcharts, a fishbone diagram, histogram, and matrix, and how all these are actually applied. We looked at decision making, where we have voting, majority, unanimity, plurality, and then weighted matrix, which is multi criteria. And it's based for group consensus and also for multi-factor evaluation. So now, let us look at the key takeaways from this video. So the first one is data gathering. It's something that you cannot avoid, and it goes through all the stages of the project. Then we have multiple methods of gathering data, okay? Then root cause analysis, we also looked at it as a takeaway. Then we have the right representation tools for the data, flowcharts, histograms. And then we also need to make decisions based on what we have to make in a project environment. Then the cycle never ends. It starts from the beginning all the way up to the end. So in conclusion, what we can say is, in a project environment, you must always make data-driven decisions, whether a project manager, whether a project member or sponsor, or even project stakeholder. Any decision that you have to make in a project must be data-driven, so that you remove bias and also poor judgment, as well as poor decision-making. But you still have to follow the 4 stages of data processing in a project environment. So the first one is data gathering on brainstorming, interviews, and also checklists. Then you have your data analysis, variance analysis, and trend analysis. Then your presentation, data presentation or representation, which is also histograms that you can also use to present fishbone. You can also use that. Then decision making, where you use either voting, for example, unanimity, or even you can even use a plurality in a decision making process in a project environment. So let us look at which decision to use and by when. As you can see it on the screen. So when it comes to majority voting, the speed is very medium, but it's best for team decisions and also selecting tools and approaches. The risk is also medium. And then we have an example situation where 8% team votes on a sprint length, as an example. Then the decision on unanimity, speed also is very slow, and is also best for high stakes and go or no go critical decisions. The risk is also very low, and also all sponsor agrees to project cancellation. Okay, all sponsors, as an example. Then plurality, we have medium speed. We have best for selecting from 3 or so options without consensus. You can use the plurality. And then risk also is medium. And then example is a situation. Example situation is when vendor selection with 4 candidates. Then when it comes to multi-criteria decision making, MCDA, the speed is slow, but it's best for complex trade-offs needing objectivity. And also the risk is very low. Then you have as an example, you want to choose ERP systems across 6 criteria. So you can also use it. We have looked at one example before. When it comes to autocratic, the speed is very fast, because remember it's one person who is making that decision. And then it's also good for crisis. It's also good for emergence or even clearly owned decisions. And then the risk is also very high, because they might use incorrect or poor information or even bias. And also you might have disengaged stakeholders and project members. Then PM makes agent technical call during the incident, as an example. So this is quite important. So in this particular section, we are going to go through the summary of all the methods at a bigger glance. The data gathering, the data analysis, data representation, and also decision making. So let's move on. So we looked at data gathering and the methods that you can use: brainstorming, interviews, focus groups, checklists, and also surveys. And data gathering methods, they're also best for certain circumstances. For example, brainstorming is good for generating ideas and risks, and also interviews for deep individual insight. Focus group, it's mainly on the expert consensus, And then checklists, nothing is missed. You have put down the good and the bad. And then the surveys, you have a large scale data that you're going to collect. We also looked at examples. For example, risk ID for IT migration is good for brainstorming. How long is it, the risk? What data type are we using? Is it numeric or is it non-numeric? Hospital HR requirements. Then also focus group on bank application requirements. What are we focusing? Are we focusing on trade finance? Are we focusing on retail? Focusing also on finance or even on lending. Then the checklists, if you want the nice to have, you can also use it as an example. Then customer needs surveys also. Then data analysis, we looked at different methods. Alternative analysis, we looked at root cause analysis, variance, trend analysis, where we look at alternative analysis being good for evaluation of options and root cause analysis being good to find the real problem. And then variance analysis for measure of performance gap, and then trend analysis to detect patterns over time. And the examples that we have is to build or buy or hire as an example. Root cause 5 whys for schedule. Why did it happen? And then what else happened? Variance analysis. We looked at cost variance analysis, schedule variance analysis. Trend analysis also, we looked at rising defect trend as an example, or even why so many issues are being retained once they are resolved. Data representation, we looked at flowcharts, a fishbone diagram, histogram, and matrix, and how all these are actually applied. We looked at decision making, where we have voting, majority, unanimity, plurality, and then weighted matrix, which is a multi criteria. And it's based for group consensus and also for multi-factor evaluation. So now, let us look at the key takeaways from this video. So the first one is data gathering. It's something that you cannot avoid, and it goes through all the stages of the project. Then we have multiple methods of gathering data, okay? Then root cause analysis, we also looked at it as a takeaway. Then we have the right representation tools for the data, flowcharts, histograms. And then we also need to make decisions based on what we have to make in a project environment. Then the cycle never ends. It starts from the beginning all the way up to the end. So in conclusion, what we can say is, in a project environment, you must always make data-driven decisions, whether a project manager, whether a project member or sponsor, or even project stakeholder. Any decision that you have to make in a project must be data-driven, so that you remove bias and also poor judgment, as well as poor decision-making. But you still have to follow the 4 stages of data processing in a project environment. So the first one is data gathering on brainstorming, interviews, and also checklists. Then you have your data analysis, variance analysis, and trend analysis. Then your presentation, data presentation or representation, which is also histograms that you can also use to present fishbone. You can also use that. Then decision making, where you use either voting, for example, unanimity, or even you can even use a plurality in a decision making process in a project environment. If you want me to create more videos based on what we have covered in this video, or maybe there's a concept or there's an idea which is not yet clear to you, you can reach out to me, or you can let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.